defense attorney is not responsive.
Yo,
What's up? Hit us up. Go ahead.
pretty closely. I didn't catch the first part of that question, but it sounded like that it is precisely what the defense attorney was implying. But they objected as non-responsive. The question. The experts are free to, it's up to the attorneys to say it's beyond the scope of their expertise, or for whatever reason it's not included in the report, so they can't cross-examine it effectively. That's all on the attorneys to object, and you saw effectively the defense attorney did there as non-responsive. Also, I have a bone to pick with you.
Oh fuck.
Why do you keep saying that murder 3 is more probable than murder 2?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I feel like the felony murder shit is just so sweaty to try to nab a police officer on. We kind of talked about that, right?
A little bit, but
I thought you said that they could go down charges if one doesn't stick. Is that not true?
they can. They could convict on all 3 if they wanted to.
Oh, why not go for the highest then?
They're going for the highest. They're going for all of them. But in this case, I think the most plausible case is that of felony murder. But I don't know why Destiny think that's implausible. Do you think that a police officer shouldn't be liable for assault? Suppose I'll give you a hypothetical.
Well, no. So I think we talked about this a little in DMs. I was just saying that it feels like if you set the precedent that felony murder is okay to nab cops on, it feels like there's all sorts of that would come up in almost every single wrongful death or whatever. Every single death.
Hold up, there's a little bit of latency
that resulted from police interactions, but would all start to fall under that.
Well, I'll preface this by saying I don't agree with felony murder anyway. I think it's a bad doctrine. But if we're gonna have it, do you think that cops should be liable for felonious assault? So suppose that a cop pulls you over, takes you, and is whatever the use of force here, it's okay for them to pull you over, and it's okay for them to cuff you. But instead of cuffing you, they just beat you over the head repeatedly with a flashlight.
You've got slow.
Would you think that cop should go to jail or at least be charged with assault?
You're caught up.
Yeah, I think.
I saw you were just laying there, not watching.
Be charged with assault, so. Yeah, for sure, with battery or whatever, right?
And if that happened between normal people, same deal,
if you wanted, you could look at my roll and shit.
Okay. Now, if that happened between two normal people,
put my headphones.
And as a result of that assault, you didn't intend to kill that person, but the person just dies because they had a traumatic. It was at the wrong time, the wrong place, and you just happened to kill them with your flashlight.
Is that okay?
That would be liable for felony murder, wouldn't you agree?
What?
It's an assault is an inherently dangerous felony.
Okay, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't that just be
It could be another murder.
Yeah, I was gonna say, wouldn't you get second degree or something at that point? I thought felony murder is more like. Here's not my issue with felony murder. Maybe I just misunderstand felony murder. So you can tell me. My issue is, let's say that you're 3 or 4 cops get called to a scene or something, right? And in the course of resolving an altercation, one cop engages in assault or unprovoked, something that would be charged, right? Not just he's not just trying to.
Yes.
Yeah. And let's say that in the course of doing that, somebody gets killed. Aren't you essentially saying that the 3 other cops could then be charged with felony murder as accomplices to that primary officer's assault? I thought that's what the main felony murder charge. Because if you kill somebody in the commission of doing a violent crime on them, I don't think many people would disagree in that case. That wow, felony murder is horrible. In that case, it's almost like second degree murder or something, right? If it's reckless endangerment of a person's life and you're engaging in activity. But I thought the felony murder shit is that you're the getaway driver for a robbery, and during the course of the crime, somebody has a heart attack in the gas station, and now you're looking down the barrel of a felony murder charge. I thought that was why people get so upset about felony murder.
So let's start even more basic. What in your mind? What's murder? Well, this is a good informational exercise, I think, for DGG as well.
What's
murder?
First degree?
Murder in general. No, just murder. What's murder?
The unjustified killing of another person
with malice. So the term that is the legal term of art that's used in the common law and for decades has been, or centuries really, is malice aforethought. And there are many ways to get to malice. Not all killings are murder, right? We talked about the Rittenhouse case. Obviously, you're familiar with other types of homicides, including negligent homicide and involuntary manslaughter, things like that. Those are types of potentially criminal homicides, sometimes not even criminal. I mean, some homicides are totally justified. Specifically, murder is a killing, a homicide with malice aforethought, an unjustified killing.
And the malice aforethought differentiates it from something like manslaughter, where maybe you get
exactly right. So you can have an intentional killing that's not murder, even if it's a crime. So there's such a thing as voluntary manslaughter. And in that case, you actually intended to kill someone. but the state or the government will downgrade your offense because of some other collateral circumstance, such as, let's say that you catch, I don't know, your girlfriend in bed with another person, or your wife, let's say, and you in the heat of passion kill your girlfriend or your wife and the person who's sleeping with her. That, you know, in many jurisdictions, that might be downgraded to voluntary manslaughter. There's, in the sort of model penal code context, there's something called extreme emotional disturbance, and that's another way of downgrading what would be an intentional killing into manslaughter without malice. And likewise, you can have murder without intentionality. In fact, every single murder charge, the 2 murder charges in the Chauvin case, no one is alleging that Chauvin intended to kill George Floyd. None of the theories rely on that. The third degree, and don't get your guys' heads twisted.
I thought the second degree murder did imply some intentionality, even if it lacks like forethought or whatever. That, like, if you were getting on a second, now for the third degree murder, my understanding is you're correct, but for the second degree murder, that would require him to have that malice of forethought.
So let's be clear. Every single state can have different rules about how they define their murders, and so degrees change between states. And so when we're looking at degrees, this is very specific to Minnesota, although other states might have similar type statutes. Minnesota defines second-degree murder as either an intentional killing. So let's suppose that you're on the street, you see someone on the street, you don't like how he looks, you pick up a gun and just shoot him in the face. That would be an intentional killing, would be second-degree murder. You might be asking yourself, well, what's first-degree murder? In Minnesota and many other jurisdictions, there's an additional sort of factor known as premeditation. And that's essentially lying in wait, cold-blooded murder, where you planned it out a while back or something, or not even, it doesn't even have to be that long. But there's another theory of second-degree murder in Minnesota, and that's felony murder. And it's an easier charge to complete, which we'll explain in some reason. The third-degree murder in Minnesota and many other states is something that's known as reckless indifference murder or depraved heart murder, evincing a depraved mind or without regard for human life. And that is when your behavior is very, very, very reckless, and it's so reckless that we're gonna attribute malice to you. You know, you shot randomly in a parking lot. Sure, you didn't intend to kill anybody, but it just so happens that you ended up killing someone. You were so reckless that the law is going to consider that malicious, and we're going to attribute malice of forethought to you.
Sure. And this was for second degree?
This would be for the context of Minnesota. That's third degree.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
what they're saying is Chauvin's knee was depraved, and his hold depraved an indifference for human life, namely George Floyd's. And there was this big legal discussion prior to the case about whether or not this conduct qualified for third degree. They actually dismissed the third degree charge for a big part of the pretrial stuff. The judge actually said in Minnesota, you don't qualify for third degree, but you do qualify for second, because there was this discussion about whether or not the reckless conduct at issue can be particularized to a singular individual. And what happened is, in the middle of the proceedings of this case, a higher court came down and said it can be particularized, and reversed the judge's decision to dismiss the third degree charge and reinstated the third degree charge. But that, I believe, right, and my understanding, my sense of it, is the standard for proving a reckless, depraved heart, sort of so gross conduct beyond the scope of what the cop was allowed to do, is harder to prove than just a regular felonious assault. I mean, think about this. So one is just you intended to commit a felonious assault. So you're right that there is some intentionality that you have to prove, and that's namely the assault, the underlying qualifying felony. And so that needs to be proven no matter what by the prosecution. That to me seems much simpler to prove, that felonious assault. And once you've proven that intention to commit the felonious assault and the felony assault, you almost have murder de facto, so long as you prove. Remember, we had that conversation with Bastiat about whether felony murder requires causation. As long as you prove causation. And so much of the debate shows you that, in fact, I was right in that discussion. Causation is absolutely necessary. That's why they're having all these debates about whether or not it was drugs that killed him. Because if it was 100% drugs, or there was no substantial causative factor for the knee hold, then Chauvin walks. And that's why these expert witnesses about how he died are so important. Because if they say it wasn't the knee, it was the drugs, for the most part, Chauvin wins.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And so my reading of it is as a legal plausibility thing. To me, it's a lot easier to prove a felonious assault than this depraved heart standard and this gross departure.
Wait,
but
so the
also-
depraved
yeah.
heart thing, you saying that
Yeah.
would be third degree, or that would also be second degree?
That would be third degree. And it's weird because the second degree, for me, it would be extremely weird to see a third degree murder conviction, a manslaughter conviction, and not a second degree conviction. Because if you prove that he's, gone far beyond the standard, you prove that he's caused the death already, how can you have not proven the simple felonious assault? It would seem almost to be a byproduct of
And how would
whatever...
you how would you prove the assault? Sorry, say this again.
Right. So one of the big other questions besides causation is, what is the police standard, in fact? Right? So everyone's talking about, well, is this knee hold acceptable? Did they teach it? Is this a gross departure? Is this, what was the crowd acting like? Were the cops confused? Did they hear things? Did they not hear things? Those kind of factors play into whatever the police standard was. And because you can have, as you know, cops interact with people all the time in aggressive ways. They have to do their job. You can't just have a system where if I believe that cops shouldn't be allowed to touch you, I don't know what I would say to you in the defense of property cases, because then it really would be you let all the robbers of the world get away with everything.
Yeah, there has to be some implicit threat of violence behind every police interaction.
Correct.
Otherwise, you would just infinitely avoid cops, or who the fuck would care if a cop was approaching you? Just walk away and never
That's
talk to
right.
them. Yeah.
But you, of course, you would probably be aghast at the flashlight example I gave you. Like, you would, of course, want that, whoever that cop was who hit me with a flashlight when he only should have, did a DWI check. He should go to jail, right?
Yeah,
And so-
or be charged, yeah.
or be charged. And so the question is, was this a departure from the use of force standard? And was it so you can already see why it's so much harder and complicated to charge police officers, because they have a ready-made defense of justification for their use of force. And so that's what makes oftentimes charging these cops very difficult. In the case of the Breonna Taylor shooting, I don't know if you remember, there was no charge in that case for the cops who actually shot at and supposedly killed Breonna Taylor.
Wait, oh no, for those cops, for sure. And I mean, I don't think there should have been any charges for the shooting. I don't know about the breaking and entering, but the guy that shot from outside, that guy was charged.
That guy was charged, but so notice what he was charged with.
Reckless
wasn't
endangerment or
charged-
something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But why wasn't he charged with the murder? Because
Because he wasn't the one that hit them.
he didn't
right?
cause it.
Yeah.
Right. And so because he didn't cause it, they can't even charge him with manslaughter because he didn't cause it. They determined, right? And remember, this wasn't a jury determination. This was, people have discussions about this, so that you should trust the police. They had a quote unquote special prosecutor, I think, brought in but I think he might have just been the state attorney general. I don't know what the deal was with him. But he determined that that there was no charge to be had on murder because the bullets that killed her came from the cops at the door, and he determined that the cops at the door were justified in shooting, and so no charge because they were justified, even though there's no dispute that they killed her. There's no dispute, and there's no dispute that she's innocent, in fact, right? She didn't do anything, as far as we know. But they nonetheless said that she was justified. And also, I'm seeing something in the chat as well about qualified immunity. Get the qualified immunity thing out of your head. That's mostly in the context of civil cases and the extent to which you can find civil damage liability for cops who go above their force. So this is not quite the same as qualified immunity. Yeah.
Wait, so
go ahead.
so it was found that the cops did have the right to, like, how did they resolve the idea behind whether or not they entered unlawfully into the apartment?
So that almost in the Breonna Taylor case, you mean?
Yeah.
From what I recall, there was a factual dispute about whether or not they knocked
Yeah.
and what happened there. But essentially, I think the decision from and I could be wrong about this, someone correct me if I'm wrong, even if there was a invalid warrant or whatever process, and I think it has been established that eventually there was a no-knock warrant issued at some point.
Well,
or
initially I
something.
thought it was no knock, but I thought they changed it. I don't remember
They might
if
have
they legally
changed it.
changed it or if they just agreed that they would change it. Like, it wasn't like from a judge or whatever, that it went from a no knock to a not
Right.
conserve or whatever.
So there's some factual dispute there, but remember, this is not a case about whether or not we broke and entered. It's a case about murder potentially, or some
Well, but
kind of
that seems
homicide.
to be materially what matters, right?
Why is that?
Because, well, I mean, I think that to most reasonable people, the cops returning fire is somewhat justified, right? They were shot upon first.
Correct.
Yeah. So that's
So you would-
obvious. But the question is did they break and enter a house? Because if they did everything right, let's assume that they heard the cops from the outside, and then the boyfriend fires a shot at the police officers, and they return fire. Yeah, then everything is. I think that at least the cops inside, I mean, acted in, I guess, how I would expect them to, or arguably in what we should expect them to act. But if they broke and entered with no warning, and then somebody shoots at them, and then they return fire, that if I break into somebody's house and they
Yeah.
shoot at me and I shoot at them and kill them, I don't know if I can claim self-defense, right?
So it would depend on the situation.
Yeah, it would depend. Of course, like if I'm in somebody's backyard and somebody like runs up to me
Right.
and we get into a fight, yeah, of course. But like
What
if I
if you have a
literally, and
mistake?
if we duplicate that situation, if I break somebody's door in and somebody from inside fires at me, and then I pull out a gun and I shoot them, is that like a justifiable killing on my end? Like,
Just remember, you're the one who has said, I think rightfully, that there can be situations in which both individuals have a right to self-defense.
Sure.
And I think whoever the attorney general was, they didn't end up charging the boyfriend who shot at the cops, precisely because they think that his shootings may have been justified, or at least they thought that there was some chance that could be reasonably argued. But suppose that you think that you're in the right house, or let's say you think you're arriving into your friend's house and you're about to surprise him in a party, and you break open right away, and all of a sudden some guys just start shooting at you, and you have a gun. In that case, even if they're private citizens, you could potentially see a case in which, because of the mistake, the honest mistake, you might say. Again, I'm not saying that I know that as a factual matter the police were honestly or not honestly mistaken about the warrant or what's going on there. But you could still see a case in which the shooting could be justified even among private citizens.
sure, that's why I feel like it's pretty important to figure out if that initial break-in was justified or not, or at least that's what it feels like to me. But you disagree with that? You think it doesn't matter?
I think it's of limited, unless it's really, really grossly some sort of gross, malicious warrant process, or just some random, capricious, arbitrary entry into some apartment. I don't see how that would. Maybe if you had evidence.
I guess like
Yeah.
So maybe I'm looking at this more morally than legally. Maybe there wouldn't be a crossover here. But like, so one of your pushbacks against my self-defense thing is that you're like, well, let's look at how this could theoretically be abused. Anytime you've got lethal self-defense involved, you're only gonna have one person left. It hurts our ability to figure out what happened to things, right? If I was looking at this like at least morally, and then I don't know legally if this is taken into account, right? Couldn't theoretically any officer just break down any door, hope the guy shoots at him, and then just execute him?
Yeah, and I think that's you've examined a big policy problem and why people want the warrant procedures changed.
Oh, something related to this, whatever happened to the one woman cop that broke into that black guy's house? She thought she was in her house, but she was in his house, and then she
that's
killed
right.
him. Yeah, what happened with that?
I think she might have been charged with that. She might have been charged with a murder there. I think she either was convicted or she might have pleaded or
Because I
something.
feel like
don't-
that's comparable to this, because it's fully justified, really, in her head. If she really truly thought that she was in her house and there's a fucking stranger in her house and she decides to shoot, like, I think that could be
Yeah.
justified. But the fault was that it wasn't her fucking house. She went into the wrong place.
Correct. Yes. So that's why I think the factual circumstances of this matter, and also it relates to the Rittenhouse case, because one of the factors for self-defense being justified or not is you can't try to provoke someone into shooting you on purpose.
Yeah.
And so one of the cases in which Rittenhouse, his claim of self-defense might be vanquished in the case. I mean, they're still going after him. He's still a criminal defendant, as far as I know. Is if the prosecution can prove, let's say they have a text message that says, Rittenhouse says, "I really hope I can get someone to try to chase me so I can shoot them down." I'm pretty sure. I don't quite remember the statute off the top of my head, but there might be certain situations in which self-defense might be foreclosed to you because of some mindset or purpose behind you intentionally trying to provoke an attack upon you. And you could see that also in the cop case that you found. Maybe if you were so reckless as to just randomly go into someone's house, we could attribute the same kind of non-justification to you, which would otherwise perhaps be justified. I don't know. What do you still feel about the likelihood of either has anything I said? There's another element to this, which I guess I buy, which is the sensibilities of the jury. Perhaps the jury, not thinking in this kind of hermetically sealed, legally way, just knowing the outcome potential, could charge lower, even though I don't think it makes sense as a legal conclusion to
It
one over the
really
other.
does feel like this conviction is looking for like a needle in a haystack. Like, even if I agree on the merit of everything you're saying, there are so many ancillary things that are probably justifiable from the cops' end that make it really hard. But I don't know. I guess we'll see like how the jury looks or whatever.
What do you think makes it? I don't think it's an open and shut case. Just to be
Yeah.
clear.
So like the things that complicate this is that one, Floyd was acting the entire time like he was on something. Like that, if you watch the video, it looks
Yes.
like he's like out of his fucking mind. So
it's clear.
one.
That's clear to me, folks, when I see the tapes of the gas or whatever the food place, the cup foods. It's I've been in, and I'm sure you have been too, in like plenty of bodegas and food places with people who are on drugs.
Yeah. So that's one. So that's almost foregone for sure. And then there was some drugs in his system, of course. Not saying that he OD'd, to be ultra clear, but he was clearly like not in a right state of mind. So that's one. Number two.
Wait a minute. Sorry,
Yep.
but that's relevant to you because you recognize causation is an element for all the murder charges, even felony murder, correct?
Sure. I'm just looking at it in terms of like how I think like a jury would view
jury
like
would
all
say-
of these
okay,
like
got it.
complicating causes. So one is that Floyd is obviously on something, like he's drugged out of his mind. Two is that not only was Floyd like, I don't know if I'd say belligerent or non-compliant, he was non-compliant to such a level that even bystanders were critical of him for it. Like up until they were on his neck, like, I don't know if I would use the word supporting the cops, but bystanders were critical of Floyd, like saying like, "Hey man, get in the car. Hey man, stop with this bullshit." Blah blah blah. Like there were, I think, two people on the sidewalk, at least one. I remember. I think there were two people on the sidewalk that were like kind of making fun of Floyd or like poking him, like saying like, "Dude, like get in the car, whatever." That hurts. Three, it's pretty clear that Floyd is trying his hardest to be incredibly non-compliant the entire time. So for instance, like saying like, "Oh, I've got claustrophobia, I can't go in the car," or he was saying he couldn't breathe like 10 minutes before he was ever even on the ground, right? He was constantly saying, I can't breathe.
I'll roll the windows down and put your legs in, all right? I'll
Y'all,
put the air on.
God, look at that. Look,
You're not even listening.
Look at it.
We can fix it, but not while you're standing out
Okay,
here.
man. God, y'all do me bad, man. Man, I don't want to try to win. I don't want to try to win. I don't want to win. I'm claustrophobic. You ain't gonna win. I'm claustrophobic. I got anxiety. I don't want to do nothing to them.
I'll roll the window down.
Then there was the fact that even once they got him in the car, he like ended up escaping and getting out the other end. So like, I feel like the officers, for the most part, I don't know if this is controversial to say, I think the officers for the most part conducted themselves really well right up until the point where the guy has his knee on his neck and then sits there for like 8 or 9 minutes. I don't know why he thought that was justified or why he thought that was a good idea or whatever. However, once he does it, Floyd continues to echo the same complaints he did in the car about how like he can't breathe and blah, 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 blah. And like, is it reasonable that an officer would say that like, or think that like, well, if he's able to talk, he's able to breathe? I know that a lot of people think that's true, even if it's not true. So like these are like all of the complicated ancillary things that I wonder would make a jury hesitant to convict on any type of second or third murder charge. Yeah.
I understand that right now you're taking the position of the jury.
Just looking at it in terms of from the jury. Yeah.
yeah.
So that's why I say needle in a haystack, because I think personally, I believe something wrong happened here. I don't think that there is any justification for sitting on him for that long. You had enough officers there to control him. He wasn't being violent. He was just trying to escape, and you already had him on the ground with the situation under control. There's just no reason for it. But trying to find that conviction with all the ancillary stuff to like a normal jury, I don't know if that's going to be really difficult or not. That's what I'm.
Well, here's a question for you as a normal jury. Suppose you had all the same background and information that you just told me. He's on drugs. He's being, in your words, non-compliant, and saying all that stuff. And then Chauvin, instead of putting his knee on him, just proceeds to shoot him in the head. Would any of that stuff previously matter to you?
No, absolutely not. I don't think anybody would care. I think it would clearly be an unnecessary escalation at that point. Yeah.
Okay. And so I would, first of all, I think there is some question about everything you say, or imply that perhaps there's not a question about, which is the police's conduct prior to everything. Him being put on the ground, there's some question about whether he should have been prone for as long as he was, whether or not there should have ever even been someone restraining him on the ground. There is a dispute of experts, of police. The chief of police the lieutenant in charge of the homicide division, you know, pretty important people in the Minneapolis Police Department, the head of the police officer, saying that this was not what should have been done. You know, the training person said, you know, it's important to move them to the side. So there's a lot of factual questions about what the proper application of force was prior to the knee hold. And then, to me, force needs to be analyzed at every moment. And it can't be the case that previous justification of force then justifies everything and anything. And I don't know why it would matter all the non-compliance before if the non-compliance doesn't justify that hold. All it is doing, essentially what you're saying is the jury...
I don't disagree with you
Yeah.
from an intellectual